Beat 'em ups, the genre that lets us live out our wildest fantasy of taking on waves of bad guys with absurd weapons, cartoonish violence, and the thrill of chaotic combat. And today, we're talking about Big Helmet Heroes, a game that wears its inspirations proudly on its helmets. Developed by Exalted Studios and published by Dear Villagers, this game looks to bring us back to the good old days of the Xbox 360, where variety was at the centre, and off-the-wall games really broke some new ground. I have to say, if Castle Crashers and Happy Wars had a baby, raised it on a steady diet of medieval madness and absurd humour, you'd get this absolute gem. But is it a royal triumph or a nightmare? Well, my name is Fletcher, this is Xbox Nation, and let's dive in and find out. Big Helmet Heroes doesn't try to reinvent the wheel, but it polishes it to a shine. The core gameplay is classic beat 'em up fun, with that hack, slash, dodge, and combo your way through waves of enemies while looking cool doing it. The combat is immediately satisfying, with weighty animations and impactful hit reactions, making every battle feel visceral and engaging. There's actually a surprising amount of nuance in the mechanics. You have basic attacks, which are complemented by a range of combos, aerial strikes, and defensive moves, and you also have superpowers that can be game-changing when timed correctly. Enemies will adapt to your strategies though, so button mashing won't always cut it, especially at the higher difficulties. Within this game though, players can unlock 29 different heroes throughout their journey to rescue the princess. But let's be real, not every hero is truly unique. Instead, they actually fall into 4 main archetypes. You have warriors, which use swords and shields, balancing offense and defense for a straightforward but powerful playstyle. Rogues, which wield dual weapons, darting around like caffeinated ninjas, relying on mobility and speed to outmaneuver their foes. You then have monks who take the wax on wax off approach with a staff, allowing for rapid multi-hit combos that overwhelm enemies. And then you have brutes, which carry massive weapons that look like they were forged by a blacksmith with something to prove. They do hit like trucks, but move like tanks. Each hero though has a distinct design and personality, brought to life through exaggerated animations and expressive character models. But where they truly stand apart though is their superpowers. These are unique abilities that can turn the tide of battle once their energy gauge is full, and let me tell you, these abilities really do make all the difference. Now, moving into these abilities, let's talk about the Brute, because smashing enemies with a giant hammer never gets old. The impact of every swing is deeply satisfying here, enhanced by fantastic sound design that makes each hit feel like a wrecking ball colliding with a building. When the superpower kicks in though, the hero will grow to a ridiculous size, sending enemies flying with every single stomp. The screen shakes, foes scatter like bowling pins, and it's absolute chaos in the best way possible. If you've ever wanted to feel like a god of destruction, this is the way to do it. On the other hand, if speed is more your thing, then Rogue is the way to go. He'll zip across, slicing through foes, chaining together lightning fast combos. His superpower in this game is one of the flashiest here. It's a screen-wide energy beam that looks straight out of an anime showdown. It cuts through everything in its path, melting enemies in an instant. The first time that I actually activated this, I actually sat back and said, wow, that's really cool. Moments like this make Big Helmet Heroes stand out, giving players a real sense of power and agency. Now, let's move on to the level design and visuals, and Exalted Studios clearly had fun designing the world of Big Helmet Heroes. There are 20 levels to choose from, each with their own distinct flavour. Sure, it starts off with the standard medieval backdrops, that being grassy fields and crumbling castles, but things quickly get weird in the best way possible. One level actually features a massive brute statue casually sipping a drink through a straw, a perfect example of the game's quirky sense of humour. But humour aside, the environments are gorgeous, from desert levels which are obviously inspired by ancient Egypt, to pirate themed levels where you're on the high seas. There's tons to enjoy here, and it's really great to see. The hand-drawn art style is very reminiscent of vibrant storybook, with meticulously detailed backgrounds and fluid animations. Lighting and particle effects also add depth to every single scene, whether it's the glowing of torches flickering in the dark dungeon, or the dazzling reflections of ice in a frozen tundra. These artistic choices make the game feel lively and immersive, drawing players into its whimsical world. If you thought that Big Helmet Heroes though was all about fun and games, then think again. The boss fights in this game are pretty intense, demanding a real test of your skill. Early bosses may feel forgiving, but later encounters will wreck you if you don't pay attention to attack patterns. The Kraken fight, for example, forces players to juggle avoiding tentacle slams while attacking its weak points in brief windows of opportunity. One wrong move here and you're certainly in trouble, especially on the harder difficulties. Each boss battle is more than just a slugfest, it's actually a test of adaptability. Unlike regular enemies that can be defeated with well-timed combos, bosses actually require pattern recognition, patience, and strategic positioning. There are mechanical behemoths with devastating laser attacks, monstrous warlords who summon minions mid-fight, and spell-casting sorcerers who teleport around the battlefield. The sheer variety of bosses in this game keeps things fresh, and every battle feels like a puzzle to solve. What really impressed me though is how each hero's superpowers actually interact differently with the bosses. Whilst a brute's area of effect stomp might actually be effective against multiple smaller enemies, against a towering foe it may be less useful. Meanwhile, a rogue's ranged attacks can whittle down a boss house from a distance, making them an excellent choice for more challenging fights. Experimenting with different heroes and approaches keeps the gameplay engaging and encourages that replayability. Now, Big Helmet Heroes doesn't just thrive on gameplay, it also boasts a pretty quirky, charming narrative that keeps things engaging between battles. While the overall premise is pretty classic and simple, you're essentially a hero who must rescue a kidnapped princess, it's the journey that makes it just so entertaining. The game's world is packed with humorous characters, clever dialogue, and unexpected twists that make it feel lively and distinct. Instead of solemn medieval adventure, Big Helmet Heroes embraces a more light-hearted, almost satirical tone, poking fun at fantasy tropes while still delivering a compelling experience. From bumbling guards to overly dramatic villains, there's always something amusing that's happening in this game. The cutscenes are actually hand-drawn and beautifully animated, resembling an interactive storybook. These moments actually help flesh out the world without slowing down its pacing. So while the story isn't the most groundbreaking by any means, it's charming, self-aware, and just full of personality, making it a perfect fit for the game's whimsical aesthetic. I do have to say though that if you're interested in knowing the length of the game, I got through this one in about 3 to 4 hours. It's not long by any means, but the replayability keeps you coming back for more and more. I personally got the full 1000 gamer score in about sort of that 10 to 15 hour period. Now, here's where things start to go a little sideways. Big Helmet Heroes does offer co-op, but only locally and only for 2 players. And that would be fine if the experience was as robust as the single player mode, but honestly, it's truly not. When playing alone, you can swap between 2 heroes at will, which lets you recover health strategically and adapt to different fights. In co-op though, that feature is completely removed. Each player gets 1 hero and that's it. The decision to limit co-op to local only is pretty disappointing, especially in an era where online multiplayer is the norm. With 29 heroes for you to choose from and 4 distinct archetypes, the game seems perfectly suited for 4-player online mayhem, yet the feature is just nowhere to be found. Instead, co-op really feels like an afterthought, with players being restricted in their hero choices and missing out on the strategic depth of hero swapping. Worse yet, co-op doesn't actually scale enemy difficulty appropriately. Enemies remain the same strength regardless of whether you're playing alone or with a partner, meaning that 2 players can breeze through levels far too easily or struggle disproportionately depending on the heroes chosen. A better balanced system would have made co-op such a stronger feature, and I hope they rectify this in future updates. Up next is where things get a bit rough. Whilst Big Helmet Heroes runs at 60 FPS on both the Xbox Series X and S, stability is a different story. I had multiple frame dips, sometimes dropping to single digits for no apparent reason. It happened in boss fights, in basic levels, even in the menus. On top of that, I was faced with a lot of random crashes that forced me back to the Xbox home screen with no warning at all. And then there's also the hit detection issues. Too many times I found my attacks phasing through enemies, or worse, my character getting stuck into the environment. There were moments where a combat animation would clip me inside a wall, leaving me with no choice but to restart the level. These bugs are very frustrating and occur often enough to detract from the overall experience. On the Xbox Series X, the worst offender by a mile was the input lag. There were instances where my button felt incredibly delayed by almost nearly a second, making precise timing for dodges and combos an exercise in frustration. If this was an isolated issue, I'd let it slide, but it happened frequently enough that it significantly impacted the overall playability of this game. Until a major patch fixes these problems, the Xbox version is difficult to recommend at this time. What I'll also do now is I'll put a comparison on screen of both versions of this game, and there are certainly differences mainly in sharpness and resolution, but nothing much in terms of environments being tuned down on the Xbox Series S. The Xbox Series X does look to run at a fully fledged 4K, however the Series S is noticeably blurry and I don't even think holds a 1080p image. It's not the worst by any means, but make your own judgment on the screen now as to whether it'll bother your experience. They both do run again at the 60 FPS mark, so it was only inevitable that the Series S would run at a worse resolution, no matter how the developers tried to optimize it or adjust this version. There are no differences in the menu screen for a fidelity or a quality mode, so you're stuck with this one mode throughout your experience. So with that, Big Helmet Heroes is a fun, well-crafted beat-em-up with tons of personality. Its engaging combat, varied heroes, and stunning visuals do make it a joy to play, and the imaginative levels and hilarious weapon choices really do add to the charm. However, it is held back by its disappointing co-op implementation, frustrating performance issues, and frequent bugs, particularly on the Xbox Series X console. If Exalted Studios can iron out these technical issues and maybe even add online multiplayer, this game could easily become a standout in this genre. But as it stands out now, it really is a diamond in the rough, polished in some areas, but frustratingly unrefined in others. My final score for this one today is a 6 out of 10. Let me know in the comments below, are you picking this one up? And if you've played it already, did you experience the same performance issues as I came to experience? As always, hit that like button if you enjoyed this review, and subscribe for more reviews, Xbox news, and content every single day. Whilst here, why don't you check out our most recent video covering the awesome sale that's currently happening on the Xbox Store. If that's not your jam, why don't you check out this other video as well, where we cover the 15 best story games you can play on Xbox Game Pass in 2025.